Welcome, everyone. That song that we were just listening to, I like to play some music to get us started and get us in the mood, especially for those of us who come on early. You get a little thing to enjoy. That was called the Elul Nigun by Eitan Katz, and Elul, of course, is the Hebrew month that we are in right now, which is the big lead up to the high holidays, to Rosh Hashanah, to Yom Kippur. It's a time of reflection. And so we're doing a good job with Elul right now. You are all doing a great job because we are here reflecting and getting ready for the high holidays and preparing. So I'll just briefly introduce myself and then we'll get into it. And yeah, it's so nice to see many of you. I see some familiar faces. I see some new faces. I'm really happy that Beth David and Beth Tikvah, we could come together to do some of this high holiday learning. So, hello, I'm Rabbi Walker. I'm the rabbi at Beth David, and I've been there for a little over 2 years now, 2 years and I guess 12 days, because I started on August 1st, 2019. And I don't know, that's enough about me. So for this session, I'll invite you to share if things come up, if you have questions or things like that, to put it in the chat. And I will try my best to be monitoring the chat. If I don't address something, please don't be offended. I probably just missed it, but feel free to use the chat to add if you have a thought or a comment. Because we are a bit of a bigger group, it's a little hard to have a whole group discussion, so I'll encourage you to put your thoughts in the chat. And at the end, I'll try and pause for questions. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or at the end, there might be some time to unmute and ask if the chat isn't comfortable for you. Great. So we are going to do a deep dive, as I call it, into the V Dewey section of the Yom Kippur liturgy. And I know we haven't even gotten to Rosh Hashanah. Like, what am I doing talking about Yom Kippur? And the thing, I always make this mistake where I say to myself, okay, I'm going to get ready for Rosh Hashanah. And then after Rosh Hashanah is over, I'll get ready for Yom Kippur and I'll do all my prep. But those days in the middle, they pass really fast and I tend to just be tired from Rosh Hashanah. So I thought we'd get ahead of ourselves here, or not get ahead of ourselves, but really put us into a strong position and start thinking about Yom Kippur as well as Rosh Hashanah. And of course, they all go together too. So it works. So we're going to look at V Dewey at the confession section. And yeah, so I just got to put up my screen. I have to share it so that we can all see my PowerPoint. So here we go. Share. Great. Okay. You already saw that slide. Here we are. Okay, deep dive. What is the confession section all about? Where did it come from? And what meaning can we take from it? So the goals of this session are to just take a look. We're going to familiarize ourselves with the section. Maybe we're more familiar with it. Maybe we're less. Maybe we've said it a bajillion times and we've never even thought about it. So we're going to look a little bit at the history and kind of why we do it. And then also the meaning and kind of making it personal to ourselves. So we'll have kind of like an intellectual and historical, and then also a more personal side. And, you know, if some of those are more meaningful to you or appeal to you more than others, amazing, we have it all. So we can all kind of engage in different ways. Okay, so here is our agenda, right? V Dewey, what is it? I'm going to define it really soon officially. So we're going to do, what is it? Why is it? Origins and development, and what does it mean? So find personal meaning in it. So that's what we're up to today. Okay, so what am I talking about when I say V Dewey? So V Dewey is the name given. V Dewey can mean a few things, but in the context of Yom Kippur, it's the name given to a group of prayers recited on Yom Kippur during the Amidah, right, the standing prayer. And it's said both in the individual Amidah when we have our own private prayer, and also during the repetition when, you know, the cantor or whoever it is will sing it out loud. And it's said at the end of the Amidah for the individual, and the middle during the out loud. Oh, I dropped something. During the out loud for the repetition. And this little picture here is a piece of it. So it says Asham knew, but God knew, Gazal knew. And if that doesn't sound familiar, maybe if I sing it when we go, nine, 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 Hashem knew, God knew, right? So you're getting, that's a little sneak preview of Yom Kippur for you. But that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about that section. So this piece in particular, and then there's another piece that's a little bit longer also attached to that. And we'll take a look at that in detail, but just so you know kind of where we are and what we're addressing that. Okay, so first, what does V Dewey even mean? Well, V Dewey, so here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but if you can, so we're on the left-hand side, V Dewey. Vav Yud Dalet Vav Yud. V Dewey means confession for sin or prayer for pardon. And I know I usually translate it as confession. I know confession, when I think of confession, I usually think of like Catholicism. And that's not the confession we're talking about, right? There isn't kind of an intermediary. No one confesses things to me as a rabbi and then, I go to God. But we're all confessing, and there's an idea of confessing both to God, but also confessing to other people, like owning up to what we did. So that's the definition of V Dewey. And then, as always, Hebrew is made up of roots. So each word kind of has a root to it. And I like to look at the root to kind of find additional meaning. It kind of gives more depth to the definition. So the root is Yud Dalet Hey or Yud Dalet Yud. And someday I'll do like a Hebrew grammar thing and I'll nerd out about grammar, but I'm trying really hard not to do that. So you're just gonna have to trust me here. It's Yud Dalet Hey or Yud Dalet Yud. And that root means to point, and it comes from yad, which means hand, right? So the root of the word V Dewey is about pointing or your hand. And interestingly enough, it's the same root used for also thanks and praise, like hodaot, or hodim, or hoda'ah, sorry, or the prayer in the Amidah when we say modim, like modim anachnu lach, if that sounds familiar, that says give thanks, and that's also the same root as this, as todah, also todah, thank you. All of those come from the same root as also V Dewey. So there's something interesting about hands and thanks, right? If it's praising is like the raising of hands, so maybe it's like this physical thing, right? Like, I don't know, sometimes when I'm really happy or really excited, like I will like put my hands up, like, oh my gosh. So I think it's kind of like that. And my question to ponder for us all is, what's the connection between hands and confession? So if you can think about that, and we're going to see some sources that also I think help draw a connection between our hands and this idea of confession. But if you have other thoughts, happy to see them in the chat, or just something to percolate on. Okay. Well, before we go to that slide has a lot of text. So now we're going to kind of look at some of the origins of, okay, so we say this confession, but why? What's the mitzvah? What's going on? So we're about to look at a text from the Tosefta. The Tosefta is a piece of rabbinic literature that's from a similar time as the Mishnah. It's kind of like the stuff that didn't make it into the Mishnah. So from around like 100, 200 CE. So very old. And so that's what we're going to look at. And this is, from this section all about Yom Kippur. So let's see what it says. Okay, so I'm going to read in English. I included the Hebrew, but we're going to do in English. So the mitzvah of confession of V Dewey is on Yom Kippur Eve as it gets dark, right? Erev Yom Kippurim im chashecha, as it gets dark. So that's kind of the core of this thing. So, okay, so the mitzvah of confession is on Yom Kippur Eve as it gets dark. So basically, when are we supposed to do it? We're supposed to do it on Yom Kippur evening. So kind of like after the Kol Nidre service is really the essence of the mitzvah. That's when we're supposed to do it. We're supposed to only do it once, right? So what's going on? Why do we say it a gajillion times? Because now, if you look in the Machzor, we say it every single Amidah twice, right? Like each time we say it silently and then repetition. So there's a lot of saying it. So why do we say it over and over and over again if really the core mitzvah is we only need to say it on Yom Kippur Eve as it gets dark? Well, here's what they say. But the sages said, right, so it's like a little bit later, the sages said, a person should confess before he eats and drinks the final meal before the fast, lest his mind becomes unclear as he eats and drinks. So, okay, like if you're saying it at night after Yom Kippur started, well, you've already eaten a lot. So what if you ate so much that, you're feeling a little woozy? I don't know, I've definitely done that before, right? You're feeling like a little woozy because you stuffed yourself so much. So, okay, so just in case, to guard against that, we'll have them confess also right before they eat. So they'll do it before, and they'll eat, and then they can do it again. Okay, and it says, and even if one confessed before eating and drinking, it's also necessary to confess after eating and drinking, lest some iniquity happen during the meal, right? Maybe you accidentally ate a cheeseburger during your Yom Kippur pre-fast meal, so you're going to need to confess that, right? So, or I mean, more seriously, it's probably something like maybe you said something offensive to someone, or you did something mean to someone you were having. Okay, so because maybe you did something that needs confessing during the meal, okay, we have to make sure that we say it after. So we're going to say it before, and we're going to say it after the meal, right? That's as Yom Kippur starts. And then it continues, okay, and even if one confessed after they ate and drank, it is necessary to confess during the evening service. Okay, so now we already have three. We have before your final meal, after your final meal, during the evening service. Okay, and even if one confessed during the evening service, it is necessary to confess during the morning service. Okay, so we got another V Dewey in the morning. And even if one confessed during the morning service, it's necessary that they confess during Musaf. And even if they confess during Musaf, it is necessary to confess during the afternoon service. And even if they confess during the afternoon service, during Mincha, it is necessary to confess during the Elah, lest some iniquity happen throughout the day. Right? So even though the core mitzvah is confessing, is doing V Dewey at night as it gets dark, the rabbis have added in all of these extra times to confess, just to really, cover all of our bases, to make sure that if we do something on Yom Kippur, because, we don't all of a sudden become perfect on Yom Kippur. So just in case we do something between times, we're still covered for the rest of the day. So this is kind of how we got to where we are now, which is, if you go to shul the whole time, and it's a normal time, so maybe not now, but you'll say this confession many times, and you'll hear it many times, and it's to just cover our bases. Yes, Doreen, we have to confess again because of the disagreement about parking spaces in the parking lot. It can get heated, definitely, so we got to make sure we have a lot of confessions each time. Okay, I'm going to breathe for one moment if anyone has a question. Now I can keep going. So this next slide is just the continuation of that text. And now we're getting more into what is the content, and we're going to look at kind of where does the content and where does it come from. So someone says, and one needs to specify the sins. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, as it is said, this is from Exodus. Moses went back to God and said, alas, this people is guilty of a great sin in making for themselves a god of gold. Okay, so we have Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera saying, you need to specify the sins, right? When you're doing V Dewey, when you're doing your confession, you need to say, okay, I did. It's not enough to say, okay, I was wrong, I did something wrong. You have to say, okay, I specifically, spoke lashon hara and was rude to my parents and did it right. You have to specify it. And he uses a proof text. The rabbis like to use proof text from the Torah to kind of ground their opinions, to give it more authority. And his proof text is that in Exodus, when Moses goes back to God after the Israelites have built the golden calf, he doesn't just say, right, the people are guilty. He says they're guilty of doing this specific thing, of making themselves a god of gold. So because Moses was specific, we learn from that we should be specific when we're in the V Dewey. But of course, we're going to have a disagreement. So then we have Rabbi Akiva, who says it's not necessary. Okay, so if Rabbi Akiva thinks it's not necessary, then what's he going to do with this lovely proof text that Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera gave to us? It has to be doing something else. And so they say, okay, if this Rabbi Akiva's opinion is correct, then why is it specified they made for themselves gods of gold? Again, from this quote from Exodus. Rather, it was so God would say, who caused it? That they made from themselves God of gold. I am the one who gave them lots of gold. Right? So what Rabbi Akiva is trying to say is that, well, Moses brought up that they made themselves a god of gold to show that God is the one who gave them lots of gold. So in some parts, God is like partially responsible for this sin, and so that God should be nice and more lenient about their punishment. Right? So it's trying to convince God to be more merciful, and it doesn't have anything to do with specifying and listing out the sins. Yes, so there you go. So we're going to see kind of throughout this, there is a bit of tension between, do we need to specify? Do we need to list out? And now we have kind of a longer list of things that we say in our liturgy. And there's also a disagreement about, okay, well, we have that, but should we also take time to write our own list down? And some people say, yes, definitely. And some people say, no, it's not necessary. So there you go. And there's also a version of this in the Talmud in Yoma 86b. So if you want to do an even deeper dive, write that down. You can go check that out. So there we go. Okay. So now we know where the requirement comes from there, and why we say it so many times on Yom Kippur. But how did we go from that to what we say now? Who knows? No, I'm just kidding. We're going to know right now. Okay, so we're going to look at, here's the biblical origins. So we're going all the way back to the Torah. So there's no specific commandment for the people of Israel to confess on Yom Kippur. Rather, the idea of confession is based off of the scapegoat ritual. And this is the ritual we read in the Torah portion on Yom Kippur. And we also kind of do a little reenactment of it in the Seder HaAvodah, which is it's found in Musaf, right? But it's this idea on Yom Kippur, the high priest, we have two goats, right? And one goat gets sacrificed and the other goat goes to Azazel, right? Goes off into the wilderness somewhere. But before that, the sins get put on the goat, and it's a way of like cleansing Israel of their sins. It's this very symbolic thing, right? If you put all your sins on a goat and it runs away, it's a symbolic ritual. Okay, so we're going to look at the specific verse. Here we go. Aaron, right, the high priest, Aaron, shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and transgressions of the Israelites, whatever their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and it shall be sent off to the wilderness through a designated man, right? So here we have Aaron, puts the hands on the head of the goat. I wish I had a pet goat. Maybe not a pet goat, a stuffed goat probably would be better. And he confesses, right? I bolded the word in the Hebrew so you can see it. Heat vada, again, same root, V Dewey, heat vada. It's in the heat pa'el. And so he confesses it, and right. So okay, so from here we get this idea of confessing things out loud at Yom Kippur on this moment. In other writings around Tikvah, there is a requirement to say what you've done out loud to kind of confess to the person. But here, when we're talking about Yom Kippur, this is where this idea comes from. And of course, we don't do this with a goat anymore, or do sacrifices, so it had to evolve. So we're going to look now at the Mishnah, so the next kind of phase. Okay, so the Mishnah expands on this ritual, on what the high priest would do on Yom Kippur. And yeah, so here we're talking about the goat for Azazel. And it says the high priest would come to the goat for Azazel and place, right, Azazel kind of means the wilderness, some people say, oh, it gets thrown off a cliff, right? So this goat that's being sent away, and place his two hands on it and confess. And this is what he would say. Okay, so now we're not just getting like a sentence, we're getting more. And he would say, please God, we, your people, the house of Israel, have committed wrongdoing, transgressed and sinned before you. Please God, please forgive the wrongdoing, transgressions, and sins that we, your people, the house of Israel, have committed, transgressed, and sinned before you. As it is written in the Torah of Moses, your servant, on this day you will be forgiven and cleansed from all your sins. Before Hashem, you will be cleansed. Then the priests and the people standing in the courtyard, when they heard the explicit name from the mouth of the high priest, the name of God, would bend their knees, bow down, and fall on their faces, and they would say, "Blessed be the honored name of his sovereignty forever." And this piece is actually in, I mentioned this earlier, in the Seder Avodah, in the section of Musaf on Yom Kippur. It's a time where there's like a lot of bowing, or if you're not doing a full, like the full bow on the ground, and maybe if you're not doing it, it's a time when like the rabbi and the cantor on the beam are doing the full bow on the ground. I always like doing the full bow. I find it powerful. So it's an invitation to do it, or if you're going to be at home, you don't have to feel self-conscious at all, but to go fully on the ground. But anyway, so here in the Mishnah, we have Aaron saying this out loud, right? And so this is a little bit of an expansion, but again, still not really close to what we do now. It's still pretty short and sweet. Okay, so then we're going to go to the Talmud. So in the Talmud, also nothing was fixed at this time, and the rabbis of the Talmud each had their own kind of version of what they would say for V Dewey. And this is kind of a trend in a lot of liturgy, is that it starts out spontaneous and short, and then it becomes fixed and really long. Another example of that is the Amidah, when we pray, especially during the weekday Amidah, when there's all those intermediary blessings. Those used to be spontaneous, and now they are fixed and long, right? We do like 19 of them. So this is another example of that. There are lots of examples of this, but yeah, so this is when it used to be spontaneous. So in the Talmud, which is still 500, 600 CE, confessions were, well, there are a bunch of ways. So let's look. So here is kind of a smattering of what some of the rabbis would say. Okay. And where in the Yom Kippur prayer does one say the confession? An individual says it after his Amidah prayer, and the prayer leader says it in the middle of the Amidah prayer, which I think is cool that that's what we do. That's how we do it. So there you go. It's right here in the Talmud. The Gemara asks, right? The Talmud asks, okay, what does one say? What do you say when you're confessing? Okay, and Rav said, one says the prayer that begins, the mysteries of the universe, right? Razeh Olam, which is actually something we have in our machzor still, which is cool. And Shmuel said the prayer that begins with, from the depths of the heart. And Levi said that it begins, and in your Torah it is written, saying, right? So, and then the quote about being forgiven. Rabbi Yochanan says that it begins, Master of the universe, right? Ribon Olam. Rabbi Yehuda says that one says, for our iniquities are too many to count, and our sins are too great to number. Rav Hamnuna said, this is the liturgy of the confession, my God, before I was formed, I was unworthy. Now that I have been formed, it is as if I had not been formed. I am dust while alive, how much more so when I am dead. See, I am before you like a vessel filled with shame and disgrace. May it be your will that I may sin no more, for as for the sins I have committed before you, erase them in your compassion, but not by suffering. That one we also have kind of a version of that in our machzor. That one's very dramatic, but I mean, Yom Kippur is a dramatic day. We're high on the drama. So, right. So again, all of these rabbis have different ways of doing the confession. And it's not saying, oh, this one is right or this one is wrong. It's just giving us examples, and they're all kind of this spontaneous outward prayer. Okay. Going to, let's see, more. Okay, and then going forward, it's similar to general trends in liturgy. So it goes from being unfixed to being fixed and then elongated. And so later on in the 9th and 10th century, the Geonim, which are these scholars from the 9th and 10th century, formulated confessions texts that serve as the basis of the V Dewey we recite today. Two forms of confession developed simultaneously: a brief listing of sins we know as a shamnu, right? That's the one I sang earlier, and then and that one's called the lesser confession, and then a longer, more complicated one using the formula al-chet, known as the great confession. And we're going to look at both of those today. So we already have pretty early, I mean, like 1,000 years ago at least, right? We have over 1,000 years ago, we already have kind of these two things starting to develop, but they aren't fully developed. and then machzor vitri. So how do we know about all this stuff? Is we find, we have a couple of really old machzors, a couple of old sidurim. One of them is machzor vitri, which is in the 11th century. And so if we look at that, we see confessions were similar to those we have today, but shorter. So it kind of goes from being spontaneous to finally slowly being more and more written out. And both of these confessions now, the short one and the long one, are both alphabetical. They both go through the entire alphabet from Aleph to Taf. And then the longer Al-Chet one goes from Aleph to Taf, but each letter happens twice. So it's 44 lines. So it gets much longer. Okay, so I'm gonna just stop the share for a moment so I can see your faces. Okay, so that's a little bit of the history of how we got there, right? So first we looked at the Tosefta and saw kind of the command where it did say it was a mitzvah, because we don't get this idea that we have to confess from the Torah. You don't get the commandment, at least, or the mitzvah. So we saw that. And then we looked and we saw kind of the origins of what we do now from the Bible. And it was from Aaron confessing over the scapegoat, which, by the way, right, with the hands, I think that's my idea of where the hands come in, is that when Aaron confesses, he puts his hand on top of the goat and, says the sins into the goat while holding his hands over it. So I feel like that's a connection between the hands and the confession. But I also saw some other nice ones, like how we do stuff with our hands. So it makes sense to confess and have that tie in with our hands. Okay, so that was the biblical. And then we went to the Mishnah and we saw a little bit elongated of what Aaron would say and how he would confess. And then to the Talmud, where they no longer had sacrifices, so they couldn't do the scapegoat ritual. So it became more focused around prayer. And so all of these rabbis had their own spontaneous confessional prayer, though, they would say. And then as we get later, it gets more formalized and written down. And so even in our machzorim from 1,000 years ago, we have the beginnings of this prayer. Are there any questions around that? Cool. Okay, well then I will keep going. Oh, sorry, yeah? Marian?
Yeah, well, I guess that's where the word scapegoat comes from, because when somebody puts their finger on another person when they're blaming them for something, it's the same thing as the goat. They're literally transferring what was wrong onto that person, and they become the scapegoat who gets blamed for whatever sins or whatever happens. That's about right, isn't it? Sort of.
Yeah, exactly. This is where the word scapegoat comes from. Exactly, is from this goat in the Bible that gets all the stuff put on it. Yes, exactly. Okay, great. Okay, so now we're gonna take a look. I'm just gonna take a sip of water. And again, feel free to keep putting things in the chat. And if you feel like you want to ask a question and maybe you don't want everyone to see it, you can also just private chat me as well. Or if you want to private chat Cora, she's also a good person to private chat and she can send it along to me. Okay, we'll reshare the screen. Okay, here we are. So now we're gonna take a look at the text. So here it's this one, and then we'll look at the other one. And yeah, and I guess the thing to think about, I'll read through it, and it's not necessarily obvious, but again, it's in alphabetical order: Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, etc. And if there are things you feel like, if there's any overarching themes you're seeing, or things that you feel like are missing here, think about that. And also you can think about as well, but don't share this one in the chat, but if there's something that feels relevant to you that you feel like you need to atone especially for on the Yom Kippur, I would like take a note of that and maybe write it down, but you don't need to share that in the chat. We're not going to do like a group confession here or anything like that. So okay, here we go. Ashamnu, we have trespassed, we have dealt treacherously, we have robbed, we have spoken slander, we have acted perversely, we have done wrong. We have acted presumptuously, we have done violence, we have practiced deceit. We have counseled evil, we have spoken falsehood, we have scoffed. We have revolted, we have blasphemed, we have rebelled, we have committed iniquity, we have transgressed, we have oppressed, we have been stiff-necked, we have acted wickedly, we have dealt corruptly, we have committed abomination, we have gone astray, we have led others astray. Okay, sorry, before we, I didn't want to do that. Okay, before we go to the longer one, to the all hates. I think one of the things that I've been noticing, both with this and the all hates, is how, like, I feel like I would think that there would also be some like ritual stuff in here, maybe, because a lot of what Yom Kippur is about is kind of thinking about how sins against God, and I mean, in some way, I think in many ways, I guess sins against other people, like when we do wrong to other people, in some way is against God. If we're talking about, we're being made in a divine image, and it's hurting the greater community, not just that one person. But there isn't a lot there about like, oh, I did something, I should have like kept Shabbat and I didn't keep Shabbat, or I should have like, I did this thing on Shabbat, or I did this thing on a holiday, or I didn't do this thing, or whatever. Like, that's not here. Yes. Okay. And I see Cora said, seems like not acting on something important is missing. Yeah. That kind of the sin of not doing, or yeah, definitely. Okay. If there are any other thoughts, feel free to share them. Okay. Now we're going to look at the all hates. Again, it's long, it's 44 lines because 22 letters in the alphabet. So times 2 is 44. And I found it interesting. So this is in I don't know, Beth Tikvah, if you use the Machzor Lev Shalem, but this is the one we use at Beth David. And it has lots of like little interesting writings. So if you get bored, which it's okay. Sometimes things are boring. Like, read the sides. You'll learn a lot. I am pro reading the sides, or reading whatever educational material you would like. I think it's good. And anyway, it says there that the 44 lines are an expansion of the 6 lines that appear in Saadia Gaon's prayer book. So Saadia Gaon, from like 9th, 10th century, there were 6 lines. Now we have 44. And then in Amram Gaon's, another old siddur that we have from the 9th century, there were 12 lines. And Maimonides from the 12th century, his had 22 lines. So I guess in Maimonides' Machzor, they did the alphabet once, and then someone decided, that was not enough. We had to go the extra mile and do the alphabet through twice. And so we get our 44 that we're gonna look through now. And again, as we go through, if you see any themes emerging, and 2, if you feel like, again, if something catches your eye that you're like, oh, this is the thing I need to confess to this year, like make note of it privately for yourself. And 3, yeah, if you feel like there's something missing. So those are the things to think about as we go through. Excuse me. Okay, I will read it. Sorry, it's small. This is just part of it, but okay. So I have to move the box where I can see all of these so I can see the screen. Okay. All right, this starts, Al Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha, right? That's the we have sinned against you. Al Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha. That's how it usually sounds, right? So Al Chet, we have sinned against you under duress or willingly, and we have sinned against you through hardening our hearts. We have sinned against you thoughtlessly, and we have sinned against you in idle chatter. We have sinned against you, right? The you here, we're talking about God, right? We've sinned against you through sexual immorality, and we have sinned against you in public and in private. We have sinned against you knowingly and deceptively, and we have sinned against you by the way we talk. We have sinned against you by deceiving another person, and we have sinned against you in our innermost thoughts. We have sinned against you through forbidden trysts, and we have sinned against you by confessing insincerely. We have sinned against you by disrespecting our parents and teachers, and we have sinned against you intentionally and unintentionally. We have sinned against you by using coercion, and we have sinned against you by public desecration of your name. We have sinned against you through foul speech, and we have sinned against you through foolish talk. We have sinned against you through pursuing the impulse to evil, and we have sinned against you knowingly and unknowingly. And then we have the kind of chorus, right? For all these sins, God of forgiveness, forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement. Or there are different ways to sing it, right? Ba'al kulam elcha salichot, salach lanu, mechal lanu, ka'aper lanu. That one. Okay, so that's the first part of it. So there you go. And again, I think it's really interesting, and I'd love to hear thoughts in the chat, or I can open it up for discussion later again about this idea. I find it really interesting that we have sinned against you. We're talking about sinning against God through, disrespecting another person or deceiving others, or like a lot of these things, it doesn't seem an obvious connection to God, and yet we're making that connection. I mean, some of them are, right? Like, we sinned against you by public desecration of your name. Okay, that's pretty obvious. But, through foul speech, that doesn't necessarily seem obvious to me that that's a sin against God or something we've done to God. But here they're connecting it. Yes, I just had a question. Why is it split into various sections? I honestly think it's a stylistic thing, because it's just the alphabet. So this one kind of gets us to the letter Yud. So that's 10. Or I guess 20. So I think it's more of like a stylistic thing. It's not necessarily, it's just like, okay, we're going to put this line in here. But it's a good question. Yeah. I haven't seen anything that says, oh, it's kind of purposefully broken up in this way. But if anyone sees a theme kind of that's different from here to the next section and the third section, can let us know. Okay, so there we go. And then here it goes, continues. We have sinned against you by lying and deceiving, and we have sinned against you by giving or accepting bribes. We have sinned against you by scoffing and mocking, and we have sinned against you by speaking ill of other people. We have sinned against you in our business dealings, and we have sinned against you in our eating and drinking. We have sinned against you by greed and oppressive interest. We have sinned against you through arrogance. We have sinned against you by rejecting your authority, and we have sinned against you in judging people harshly. We have sinned against you through condescension, and we have sinned against you through stubbornness. For all of these sins, God of forgiveness, forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement. So again, a lot of it is still interpersonal. I mean, not all of it, but a lot of it there is still, which I think to me is much more relatable, at least, because I'm like, because I have relationships with people, and sometimes I do things that I wish I didn't, and in some ways that feels more relatable to me than thinking about the ritual things, and more universal in some ways. Okay, we'll go on to the third and last section. Oh, font change. Okay. So this is our third and last section. We have sinned against you by scheming against others, and we have sinned against you through selfishness. We have sinned against you through superficiality, and we have sinned against you by being obstinate. We have sinned against you by running to do evil, and we have sinned against you by sharing gossip. We have sinned against you through empty promises, and we have sinned against you through baseless hatred. We have sinned against you by betraying trust, and we have sinned against you by succumbing to confusion. For all these sins, God of forgiveness, forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement. Great, so there we go. Okay, Marvin, he said, I do not want to lie by confessing to something I know I have never done. Ooh, okay. This is a good kind of question statement thing. Yeah. So, yeah, of course we don't want to lie, confessing to something we didn't do. I think the beauty of this, and we're actually gonna look at a few texts around this in a moment. So this is a very good. I feel like Belvin, I should have paid you for this comment. But we're gonna see how they address it. But one of the things that to make note of is that it's not saying I have sinned, I did this thing. It says we have sinned. And so when we're praying as a group, it's not that you're confessing to something that you've never done. You're saying we as a community have done this, and odds are that someone in the larger group that we're all a part of has done some of these things, right? We're all a collective, and so collectively together we probably have done these things, and so we're not lying, but we're saying, okay, we know that people in our community have done this. Yeah, and it's also a nice way of not singling someone out, right? Because imagine if we were all, I'm gonna stop the share for a sec. Imagine if we were all on Yom Kippur and we only said the things that we actually did, and you get to a moment where like, okay, this one's my sin, and then you're the only one saying it, and that would be really embarrassing. And Judaism is definitely not a religion where we like to publicly embarrass people, so we're not going to make everyone stand up and be like, oh yeah, like that one's me, right? So when we confess collectively, that's also a way to protect people from being embarrassing, so we're able to say out loud some of the things we did, but kind of crouch it in oh, this is a collective thing as well. So yeah, thank you. And yes, what's succumbing to confusion? I mean, I take that as just kind of like giving up, like if we don't understand something and just being like, whatever. But happy to hear other people's interpretation of what that means. And then Big Wheel Mystery says, does we refer to everyone or to me in the confession? And why is it not I have sinned? Yeah, so we addressed that a little bit, and we're going to look, the next few texts also address this idea of why is it we and not I. And then, okay, I have another comment I'm going to read. Yom Kippur, and H is Hashem. Okay, Yom Kippur and God cannot forgive us for transgressions between people, only for transgressions against God. Yeah, exactly. So then yes, are interpersonal sounding things really interpersonal, or is there an element, these transgressions, that is something between us and God? Yeah, right, that's a good point. So when we talk about, and it says it in the Machzor many times, like Yom Kippur, it doesn't atone for those things that we do between people, it's only between us and God. But what I think this is saying actually when we mistreat people, it's also between us and God, right? Of course, we have to seek forgiveness for that person we wronged or upset, but we also have to apologize to God because everyone's created in God's image. And so when we don't treat someone with that dignity and respect, we're also kind of belittling God too in that way. And I think there's lots of ways to understand God and what God is. And there's definitely ideas in Judaism that God is relationship between people. And so especially, right, that's like a Martin Buber thing. And so especially in that view of God, if we find God in relationships, if we hurt a relationship, we're hurting God. Yeah, something to ponder. Any other thoughts or questions, or we'll do the last few things and then have time for more Q&A. Okay. Did anyone find, well, I'm curious if anyone found I hope that some of you found something to kind of like write down and think about and remember for Yom Kippur. I know we still have, a month, but just some things to think about, maybe something, help jog your memory of something, or maybe someone you need to apologize to, or we need to apologize to that we haven't yet. Okay. Boop, 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 boop. Here we go. Okay, reflecting on it all. So here, this is Rabbi Dov Peretz Elkins, and addressing this idea of we. Why do we say we? And that was something that we talked about already, but I also like what he said about it. So I'll read it to you. Confessions in Judaism, you will notice, are always in the plural. We have sinned, we have transgressed, etc. They are always meant to be said by the entire congregation, even by those individuals who feel that they themselves have not been guilty of the sins enumerated. The reasons for this use of the plural and the recitations of the confessions by the entire congregation are manifold. When one Jew sins, it is as though all Jews have sinned. This is in accordance with the principle that all Jews are responsible for one another. The confessional prayers for the high holidays are constructed to intensify our feelings of responsibility for one another. Right? So one of the reasons here he's saying is that we say we have sinned because it's this idea that we're all connected. All Jews are connected in a way, and we're reinforcing that when we say we did this, even if we or I or you personally didn't do it. And then another reason he says, he continues on this and then he gives another one. So he continues and he says, when an individual Jew celebrates, the whole community rejoices. When he weeps, the whole community shares his grief with him. When he sins, the whole community shares his sin, right? This idea, again, we're all connected. And then another thing, he says, the group recitation of the confessional is intended to remind us that the failure of the individual is very often the result of the shortcomings of the society or community in which one lives. And I thought that was a really interesting idea, right? A lot of times, maybe when someone does wrong, it's because the community around them or the society around them set them up to fail. There are lots of instances, of course, not all, and not saying it's okay, but lots of instances where someone is stealing because they literally don't have the resources they need. And so how is it that it's their own moral? So part of it is maybe their own moral failing, and part of it is the failing of the society to help provide them with the opportunities for them to be able to meet their basic needs, right? And so there's a lot of that there. Or is it, certain norms? I know in certain communities, right, there are certain norms around how we act towards each other, and certain ones there are less so. And how can we also as a community think about what norms are we upholding around how we treat people? And when there's a certain norm, I feel like it's easier for people to uphold that norm than if it's not there. So those are kind of two potential reasons why we say we. And then we'll get, so there you go. So there's some more answers for those of you who are reflecting on that we piece of why is it in the plural. And then I want to give you, if anyone has thoughts or comments on that, chat. And then great. And then one last one. So we did a lot. And here's another approach. So as you notice, there are 44 lines of Al-Khayt. Maybe one of them struck you, maybe it didn't. Maybe it was very overwhelming when I read them all and you're like just zoned out, which is fine. So what's a way to approach them? What's a different way to approach them? Or, and especially when we're doing like a silent prayer, I know for me, I have a lot of trouble when we're doing the silent Amidah, getting through all of the text. There's so much text there, just pages and pages of extra stuff that we don't, we only do once a year. So I'm not fluent in reading it fast. So I'm just like, right, trying to get through it. And often I actually read these confessions in English because I find it more meaningful, because English is my first language. So I just understand it better and it helps me make it more personal. But maybe instead of rushing through all of these confessions and all of the Al-Khayt lines, there's another way to do it. And so here is a suggestion that I came across that I also liked. So Rabbi Simon Greenberg was once asked if he did not find it repetitive, to recite the same list over and over again, right? They're saying, okay, we say this Al-Khayt stuff, we say it so many times, we say it in the evening, in the morning, at Musaf, at Mincha, Nila. So, okay, it's so repetitive. So what's the deal? And his reply was that he did not find it repetitive because invariably he would begin the recitation, find one sin that spoke to him, contemplate it, and somehow never get any further. So it's an invitation to use that approach. I mean, we say this V Dewey so many times that it's okay. Like maybe if you want to go through it and you get stuck on one, or you say, oh, this one is really calling to me this year. This is something that I really feel like I need improvement on for this year, to really sit and think about it and think about how we can be better around that one specific thing, right? To make it, instead of just some rote recitation that you're running through, or that we're running through, to stop and to really contemplate one or two pieces of this huge long list, right? And we see that, right? Kind of, that's almost like going back to the original of when the Amoraim, when the rabbis of the Talmud, when they would have their own spontaneous confessions, right? It's kind of going back to that approach of less is more in some ways. So you can kind of balance both. Maybe one time you want to say all of them and go all the way through. Maybe one time you want to kind of really stop and ponder and think about, one of these things in the whole list, or something that you really want to work on. Great. So any reactions or thoughts around that quote or the last things? Okay, I got a comment that I will read to you. I totally relate to Rabbi Simon Greenberg. This happens to me even during daily prayers. Yeah, there's a lot to get through in daily prayers too, right? I say one prayer in Pesukei de Zimra or Shachrit that speaks to me, and that's it. I get so far behind everyone, but that one prayer is sometimes more meaningful that day than hurrying through everything else. Yeah, definitely. I think there's always that balance, and I feel that a lot too. I often will say like only a few of the Psalms in Pesukei de Zimra, because yeah, it's so hard to rush. I can't read. I mean, I can read the stuff pretty fast, but it's not really doing it much for me. Sometimes it can be comforting to go through and be like, and sometimes it's nice to like contemplate what we're saying. And yeah, the same for prayer and for this piece of the confession, and really the whole High Holiday liturgy, which is very challenging. Right? Like High Holiday liturgy, it's stuff that we see most of it once a year, maybe twice a year, and unfamiliar and long. So definitely be kind to yourselves, and we'll be kind to ourselves, and really think about, okay, what are those pieces and where do I want to slow down? And it's okay to get behind people. It's okay to be on a different page, to really take this time to think about how we can be better people, because that's what the High Holidays are about, and that's what Yom Kippur is about. And I think it's a really amazing opportunity. And so it's really easy to get lost. What is it, like not see the forest through the trees, right? Like get lost in all of the liturgy and forget to really contemplate what it means to be saying it. Yes. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? If you like to unmute, I can't see all of you on one screen, so if you're raising your hand, I probably can't see you. So feel free to just unmute and go for it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there some variability on from one synagogue to another, say Orthodox to Conservative to Reform, as to how they handle the repetition and the alchates?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I haven't been to tons of shuls, but I've been to a good amount of them, and I've definitely seen it. So I grew up in the Reform movement, and from what I remember, they will like split up. So, we have 44 alchates, and they'll kind of split up and say, okay, we're going to say, 10 in this Amidah and like another 10 here. Some don't do all the Amidot. I mean, the Orthodox High Holidays I've been to, they say the whole thing every time, or at least it's in the Machzor. Like I don't know what everyone says individually. I know that I remember I was like really struck by this in college. I went to my first like Orthodox Yom Kippur service, and I saw a bunch of people who like had their own like little pieces of note paper, like their own piece of paper that they stuck into their Machzor. And every time it came up for the confession, this person would open it up and like read her own personal list, right? Which is another option, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. So lots of varieties. Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions around this? Around anything V Dewey related? Around the we piece? Does that appeal to you? This idea of like being connected, or do you think we should all be saying I, or really anything? Come up.
Rabbi Walker.
When
Yeah.
we back,
Go ahead.
Okay. Wait, sorry. Let's do Naomi first, and then Marianne, we'll come back to you.
Just at the very beginning, you were kind of hesitant of, here I am talking about Yom Kippur, and we haven't had Rosh Hashanah yet. And I think it actually was brilliant because it's a process. I mean, that we don't talk about just Rosh Hashanah, we don't talk about just Yom Kippur. We talk about Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance. So there's absolutely a good reason to be talking about Yom Kippur because we know what our goals are, like what we're reaching for at the end of those 10 days. And I think you've given us, a good insight, a good reminder. I mean, I need that reminder every year of what it is we are going to say and what it is we are saying I'm sorry for. And a reminder again that we're thinking as a group, Kol Yisrael Arivim Ze Lo. We do have to think about each other. And if we know what our goals are, then we know what the process has to be to get there. And we know, we can take a couple steps back and start with Rosh Hashanah and have the apples and honey and talk about the sweet year, knowing that it's just the beginning of a process. So, Kol HaKavod, I think you did a great job, and I'm kind of glad that you did this before it even happened.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, I like your framing of it, of thinking about it's like the goal, it's kind of where we're heading. And Rosh Hashanah is a stop along the way, and also having, this in mind of what are we working towards. And this is one of those things. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Marianne.
When did it start that people were banging or putting their hand on their heart or when did it start, and what do different people do in different eras or shuls or whatever?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something I didn't address, right? This thing that we do. There you go. And so, right, like we have all these texts, or not all these texts, but all of these old machzors, but we don't necessarily have pictures of what people did or not. So I'm not sure. I didn't find anything helpful in this area. That's not to say there isn't anything. So I want to also say I'm not sure, and maybe there's stuff out there. But yeah, I do find this gesture meaningful, and I always say we're not like beating ourselves up. It's more of like a gentle, this idea of like hardening our hearts. We want to kind of wake our hearts up and say, okay, like let's open up and be more careful about how we're treating one another in the world and all of that. But yes, thank you for bringing that in and the action. And that also, right, ties nicely to V Dewey being yod, hand, right? We got our hand, we're doing the thing. So yeah, it all relates. Thank you for that question. Okay, I think we have time if there's one more question or thing. I know it's kind of intense speaking in front of a bunch of people, but you're also at your home. So. Okay, well then, I will wrap it up. So, and to say just one, thank you so much, all of you for coming and learning, and happy to hear if you have thoughts afterwards, or if you had some epiphany that you were embarrassed to share. I'd love to hear it anyway. And yeah, just to keep thinking about what are these things that we want to do better. We're in the time of doing tshuva, of returning and thinking about how we want to be better. And it's a really great opportunity to think about, okay, what are those things that we've done that we want to do better, that we want to confess to, and maybe we want to write a list and bring it to shul with us, or have it in our machzor, or just think about it, or maybe we want to put a sticky note by the ones in the machzor that we're really feeling to remind us to pay extra attention. So lots of possibilities for all of us as we keep on going through Elul. So yeah, thank you. And
Yasher koach. Yasher koach.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.